Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of us approach midlife, we look back to discover whether or not we've achieved everything we've ever wanted to have in our lives. We find that when we go to fulfill our desires, perhaps the one thing that really slows us down is the idea of fear. As we take a look and we really examine this fear a little closer, we realize it's usually a fear of succeeding, a fear of failure, a fear of the unknown, and especially a fear of something that hasn't happened yet. Or perhaps what keeps us grounded from even taking that step forward is the fear that perhaps we've tried something like that before, fell short, and decided maybe it isn't worth the pain and the suffering we feel in trying to achieve that very goal. Well, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who's going to take a look at this fear and share it with us and decide, well, why don't we just move in the direction in spite of it anyway and get to where we want to go. Her book is No Limits. It's the powerful true story of Leah Goldstein, world champion kickboxer, ultra-endurance cyclist, Israeli undercover police officer, and I'm probably soon to be best-selling author. I'd like to welcome the Beyond 50 radio program today, our guest, Leah Goldstein. Leah, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, interesting about this book, what I really enjoyed is that you talk about the endurance cycling race that happens across America. I didn't even know about this myself. This is 3,000 miles across America. That's twice the size of the Tour de France. And it's pretty harsh, and you jumped into this with, what would we say, probably limited training as opposed to people who actually tackle a race like this.
Well, the thing is with Race Across America, it's not just an endurance sport. I'm going to say endurance has a lot to do with it, but it's really your mental ability to push yourself beyond your limits, and also very important, be able to stay awake and to be functionable. And I think that's almost a genetic thing opposed to actually developing something like that. But I knew that race was something I did on a personal level to really see if that was the one thing that would crack me, and if all the rumors were true, that it really is kind of a life-changing experience if you're able to do that race. So that's one of the reasons why I tackled that as my final race as a professional athlete.
Mm-hmm. Now, you interweave that story right off the bat, and as you're doing the race, you're describing, of course, what a person needs to have, especially when it comes to the team that's involved. But then you start, it's kind of like as you're on this race, you start reflecting on your childhood and the other things that you began to tackle as well. So you interweave, sort of like you watch that marathon runners movie. He's running the marathon or she's running the marathon, and they start reflecting on their life because, after all, 3,000 miles is a long ride.
It is. It is a long ride, for sure. Well, your body just goes through so many different emotions. Like a lot of times I would be riding and then not knowing what the heck I'm doing on the bike. And the funny thing is you remember things that happened to you when you were 10 and you get mad at your mother, and then you're happy, and then you're upset, and then you're angry. So it's a whole series of things that you go through. And like I said, you know, when you're on the bike for 24 hours straight, there's a lot of time to think. So trust me, you think about everything that you've gone through and kind of put it into perspective. And when they say it's life-changing, it really gave me a clear picture of where I need to go from that point on. Because at that point, I mean, I was already done as a professional athlete. I mean, I raced basically all my life. Mm-hmm. And really going to this new direction of writing my book and, you know, promoting my message, getting my message out as much as possible, and helping youth. And that really clarified that this was my new path after finishing Race Across America.
Well, and I know that now that you've been out there, you've been on a book tour, I'm guessing, and a motivational tour as well, that people probably are tending to ask you the same sort of questions. In other words, underneath it all, they're trying to probably ask, how do I get what I want in life with the least amount of pain? Do you kind of find that comes across the desk?
Yeah. The thing is, though, if you think that whatever you want in your life or whatever you're going to pursue is going to come easy, then it's most likely you're not going to get there, right? So I think a lot of people, they almost sit there and wait for things to come to them opposed to taking action, you know, because really when you're faced with fear, you know, you have that instinct of fight or flight, but for many of us, we freeze, right? Mm-hmm. And we freeze because of limitations. We are always lasering in on the things that are preventing us from progression opposed to the things that allow us to move forward. And I think what's super important is having a plan and being prepared with anything that comes in your way, to reach that goal. Because when we set a goal, we don't think about all the stuff in the middle, right? You just think about the goal and that's it. But there's a lot of stuff to get you there, and you really have to make a decision. Are you in or are you not in? And if you're not in 110%, well, then maybe you got to go focus somewhere else, right? And that's where I think a lot of times we tend to throw in the white towel is when things go south, and I've had things go way south in many circumstances. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, especially in my cycling career, it took me 8 years to finally get to that point that I wanted to get to, and in 30 seconds in 2005 crash, I lost everything. I'm back to square one, right? So those are the situations where it really takes inner strength to get yourself back up and climb that ladder back to the top, right? So I think it's just preparing and planning and realizing that you're going to work your ass off to get to anywhere you want to go, right? So it's just planning way ahead in advance. And if you think things are going to be easy, like I said, it's most likely not going to happen for you.
Well, and you bring up something that's so important, too, is that sometimes we'll embark on that goal without a full commitment. And, I know there was a time I was in another line of work where I constantly heard people saying, well, I'm going to go back to school, to discover myself, so to speak, but at least I've got this kind of work I can always fall back on. And in your stories, and you share some really amazing ones in here, especially when we talk about kickboxing, there was a particular person that you fought that you didn't feel she was really as committed to the sport as her husband was committed to having her in the sport. And that's the potentiality that's probably one of the reasons she also lost the fight. Right.
Absolutely. I think there was pressure. They were using that as a gateway or a direction to go into the movies in Hong Kong, right, to be this, because she was fairly attractive, long blonde hair, but she wasn't a super gifted fighter, right, but her husband so badly wanted, her to be this Canadian champion and then eventually leading up to the world champion. But when you fight someone, you can see it in their eyes. You can feel it through them. There's an energy that is emitted through a dangerous athlete or somebody who's wanting something that bad, and it was dead there. And I knew I had her just by that feeling, knowing that she wasn't in it 100%. She was in it because of somebody else, right? So that's another thing we have to look into what we decide to do. Is this what you want to do, or is this what 3 or 4 other people want you to do because of pressure? And there's a difference there with succeeding, with if it's really in your heart or if it's coming, again, from an outside source.
Now, would you say that your parents, and in reading this book, I wouldn't say they were traditional, but they certainly had pretty much a fair open mind about who you were and how you wanted to go about claiming your life as your own?
Well, that's not so true. My mother was very supportive with the things that I wanted to do, but my father had a really hard time.
I see.
He didn't want me to be a kickboxer, because, we trained in Vancouver on the east side. It's, kind of a rundown area. We call it Skid Row, and a lot of street kids would go into boxing and kickboxing. There's the background of where the sport really comes from and where the fighters come from, and he didn't want me fighting in these hotels where, motorcycle gangs, Hells Angels, they were my crowd, right?
Right.
So it was hard for my father, and even going into the military, what he wanted was, high school to be a lawyer, doctor, dentist, something secure and something that won't kill you. So
I don't know. I think there are a lot of doctors that might disagree with that.
Yeah, that's true, but a little bit safer anyways.
Right.
So it was a struggle for sure. It was a struggle, and I did think my father finally gave in when he saw how dedicated I was to what I was doing, and like I said, my mother was always, do what's in your heart, do what's in your passion, and so there was a bit of a struggle there for sure there was.
Now, to think about this too is really amazing. That the listeners should really pick up on this. Is that first of all, you knew what you wanted to do by the age of 4, and certainly being in a Hong Kong flick, which one of your trainers thought was a good direction for you to go after your fighting career, was one of those things you said, well, not so much. And the other thing, too, is you realize that as you stepped into the direction that you wanted to go, as you said, we were talking about commitment, but I think when people read this, they'll realize you really seem to enjoy where that journey was taking you, that the goal was important, but not as important as the journey itself. Tell us about that.
I think, well, the one thing, like when you're talking about what I knew what I wanted to do, is I wanted to work for the Mossad, which is like an intelligence of Israel, right? I don't know, like the CIA or FBI here in the United States. And that was the goal that I had, like my childhood dream, right till, I was 19, where I actually went to pursue that, But the one thing I think is everything that I chose to do is I loved doing it. It's what really brought life into me. And I think that's one of the reasons why even like the realization, for example, from transitioning from, going undercover in Israel to coming back to North America to pursue the cycling career, up until that point, everything kind of came easy to me. You know what I mean? But when I came into cycling, it wasn't. I wasn't such a gifted cyclist like I thought it was. But I loved it so much, and I was so thrown back how hard the sport was, that just giving up at that point would have been defeat or failure for me, So I think loving what I was doing and seeing the progression through hard work is really what drove me as well, So you really have to make sure, for one, you love what you do. With anything you choose to do in life, you have to love it first. And then if you love it, and then you can move forward from that. And it makes it that much easier with those downfalls, right, or those life barriers that push you back to get through them, opposed to, I didn't really want to do that anyways, right? So really, like I said, it was really pre-planning and knowing, and I knew exactly, throughout my life what I really loved to do. And because I loved it so much, it didn't matter what those things were that pushed me back, I would pursue them. It didn't matter. And I went through a lot of different things, as you know, as you can read through the book, on every circumstance. With almost everything I did, I had people pushing me back, whether it be externally, internally, or just a random act of craziness that happened to me. But for one, is loving whatever you do is fundamental for success.
Now, what would you say was your biggest motivating factor that pushed back through those things that were tending to be shackles or chains to try to prevent you from getting where you wanted to go?
So can you repeat the question?
The question is, what would you say was the dominating feature in yourself that allowed you to push back, or that caused you to push back against people who would be doubters, circumstances that would tend to seem a little bit overwhelming? What was that in you that would push you through that? Because we all have this.
Well, I think the funny thing, I think the best way, or I always think when I make my presentation, especially to youth, is what's the best revenge, or what's the best way of getting back at somebody who says that you can't, right? Mm-hmm. It's succeeding. It's really showing somebody what you're made out of. And it actually drove me when people said that you can't. It actually lit a fire in me, that made me want to succeed even more, right? Because the satisfaction of proving somebody wrong when they say you can't, is very powerful, right? And it shows you exactly, what the human body is capable of doing. But a lot of times when we hear, those negative voices coming out from, externally, we tend to let it shut us down, right? And using it in a negative way. But you can use that in a positive way, and I always had in my life. It doesn't matter what I did or where I was or who told me, I'd only listen to the voice that I wanted to listen to, right? So you kind of pick and choose of the things that allow me to progress in the positiveness, right, But I think, too, because, that's life. You're always going to hear somebody doubting you or telling you that you can't or whatever. So we almost should get used to that, right, and not let us bring us down with hearing those voices. But a lot of times we let it almost cripple us, right? So if we can transition that, use that into positive energy, it's amazing what you can do, and use it as fuel.
And you were someone who was actually also involved with the Israeli military and training soldiers, weren't you? Yes.
I was. I volunteered because I wasn't born in Israel. I was made in Israel, born in Canada. So I had dual citizenship. So I didn't have to go into the military, but I volunteered. And I ended up being a Krav Maga instructor, specializing in units primarily like the commando or paratroopers, and that was part of my job as an instructor. It was the base that I was training at was called Base 8, but I would be sent to different locations throughout the Middle East for specific training, not only for military but for intelligence as well.
Mm-hmm. The reason I wanted to bring that up is because I remember it was about 20 years ago, it seems like forever now, that I was catching a bit of a news program that talked about that Afghanistan soldiers were actually considered to be some of the best military soldiers in the world, and they went to explore why that was, and it was because they were predominantly trained by women. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I mean, imagine the psychological warfare a male has to go through thinking, well, what's a woman training me in commando tactics? But then they come to discover real fast, well, they're pretty competent, so you better just shut up and listen.
Well, the thing is, though, I think, too, when they see, because I also did the training with them, right? It's not that I was standing there, because you have to. That's part of the thing. So they don't want to, in their ego, I guess, sometimes we have ego that gets in the way, is, oh, my God, if she can do it, there's no way I'm going to falter or whatever. I'm going to push even harder. So, but I think, too, I mean, the people that in the military that I trained with and dealt with, I mean, they were robotic, right? It was a very small percentage of people that could actually go through that kind of training, but because I was the only female instructor, so I don't know about that. I mean, maybe with the training tactics that they had in Afghanistan, but in the Middle East where I was stationed, there was no other woman. It was just me.
Oh, wow. Boy, talk about putting the pressure on you, huh?
Yeah.
Well, and that's something, though, that to a degree you seem to enjoy, and I think that when people get into the game, so to speak, that they'll come to see and enjoy that feeling of that pressure, because that pressure is something, and it's what you described, especially in your kickboxing experience, that it propels you upward and forward in ways that you didn't even know or imagine you were capable of.
Well, I think, too, I mean, I've discovered so many things about myself going after these goals, right, that I never knew before. And that's what starts to happen, too, is when you go after your goals, things pop up. I mean, I never knew I was going to, race for 12 years, and I actually didn't know I was going to do certain things in the military, too. But then I thought, wow, because you find these skills and these opportunities that start opening up for you, and also not being afraid of, coming out of your comfort zone and exploring these new areas, right? Mm-hmm. So, again, if you have that drive, a lot of other things will come your way, way more than if you kind of sit back and decide, like I said, decide for things to come to you, because you'll be sitting there for a very long time. And, again, not much movement, right? But always moving forward. Again, I mean, so many opportunities, even when this book has been released now, has come up. Because it's full forward ahead. It's straight forward ahead, and never stopping and never freezing and never being or letting fear kind of dictate your path, right? Because, I'm not fearless. You bet I'm afraid of a lot of things, but I do it anyways, right? I do it anyway. So the misconception is, oh, yeah, people are fearless. I go out. No, people are always afraid. Athletes are afraid of what they do. A lot of people are afraid of what they do, but, again, they do it anyways.
Well, you also talk about fear in the book as well, where you say it used to be a component of fight or flight, but you said, well, nowadays it's more of a third component, which is frozen.
That's right. Well, that's what I mean. It's like, we sit there, and it's okay. Like I said, it's okay sometimes to step back, right? But in many circumstances, right, like you hear these people go, oh, yeah, I had this dream, and they're talking about 20 years ago. Right? That's not no more a dream or whatever. You have to try and make those dreams that mean most important to us, kind of not just in your head but in your heart. Really make those dreams your goals, right? But as again, a lot of times we just sit there and we watch everybody else and talk about everybody else and the great things everyone else is doing, right? It's better if you shift that thinking and that thought and think about the great things that you can do. What can I do to make my life better? What are some of the things that I've had or been thinking about for the last 10 years to really activate them, to make them a reality, opposed to sit there, again, and watching everyone else, right? Not that it's not a bad thing. When we talk about frozen, that's what I mean, is just staying there because it's safe. I feel safe not moving. You know what I mean? Because I won't fail for sure. Succeeding, I might, but I won't fail for sure. And that's where the fear is, right? It's failing.
Well, it's like what I like to tell people, too. 99% of success is just showing up. The other 1% is taking action once you do. That's
For sure.
99% of it is just showing up.
Exactly. Well, part of success is failing, though. That's part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in most cases, people who do succeed, man, they've been knocked down how many times? Right?
I remember watching an inspiring thing about triathletes, and it was really amazing to watch this because it would have you in tears after a while. That although you have people that win these Ironman competitions, what's more inspiring are watching the people who come in last. And these are the people that are crawling the last 500 feet just to get to the finish line, just to finish. And you think to yourself, that's more inspiring than the person that's strong enough to win, although that is because they certainly go through a lot as well. But someone that's just crying and doing their best to get, and you're sitting there wishing you could pick them up and put them across that line, but they showed up and they took action.
Right. Oh, totally agree. Oh, for sure. Because it's somebody who's really had to, go push themselves beyond their limits and just, because there is a time cut too, right? So that is, I totally agree with that. It's not the professional athlete that you watch, which is great because that's what they do for the full time, but it's that person who's done it for the first time, who decided to do this, right? And like you said, and they're on all fours, right, just crawling across the line, for sure. But then that really shows you, wow, this is what I can do. I can do that Ironman, whatever. And a lot of people think that these athletes, these Olympians or whatever, that they're these, a special breed of people. It's not a special breed. It's what they do for a living. I mean, that's what they do, But it's more inspiring when you have that full-time job, right? Or you have kids, or you're a single mom, or whatever. You've gone through a cancer, and you're able to come back out of that and do something like Ironman. I mean, for me, again, when we talk about inspiration, is really, for me, it's watching people doing things and succeeding, coming from hardship, right? Or coming, like you said, finishing an Ironman on all fours. To me, that's what I call real inspiration.
Yeah, we certainly had one of those on the program not too long ago, a gentleman by the name of Rich Roll, who in his 40s was fairly alcoholic, even though he was athletic. Decided, one day as he's walking up his own stairway thinking he thought he was about to collapse from a heart attack, decided to turn his life and his health around and then test those boundaries of his health by actually getting involved in both marathons and triathlon competitions and then eventually Ironman competitions, and has now been known to be the first person ever to complete 5 ultra Ironman marathons on the island of Hawaii within 6 days.
Wow, that's inspirational. Very good. Better addiction for sure.
Yeah. But what reminds me of that story is something that you talk about with yourself, and that is this ability to say, how far can I go? And it's fascinating to me also, just for the listeners to know that you're really inspired by Bruce Lee as well.
Right.
Now, you seem to run an interesting parallel to Bruce Lee's life, and this is why I say this is true. Bruce Lee had one leg that was shorter than the other, yet he overcame that obstacle. The other thing, too, is that while you were involved in Taekwondo and eventually got into kickboxing, that you ended up with a herniated disc and you were told you would probably never kickbox again, yet you became world champion in spite of that. Bruce Lee suffered a back injury very much, from an improper warm-up, as I understand. But that put him, on his back for about 6 months and was told, you probably won't be the same as you were before, so you might want to think about something else. And he decided to see, well, how far can the human body go, because he became a better martial artist than he ever was after this injury. So I see, and you were pretty much the same way.
Exactly.
I understand that tumble down the stairs. Go ahead, share it with our audience.
The back injury happened because of improper warm up too. I was sparring with a guy who was probably 30 pounds on me, like heavier than me, and it was just some, not the body not being properly warmed up. He kind of leaned into me, and then I heard a snap in my lower back. Oh yeah, I remember that. I mean, I almost forgot. I have so many crashes that I almost forgot about that one. But that was a big one. I remember I couldn't even walk. Like I couldn't walk for, I'm going to say, about 3 weeks, where it would take me, to walk a mile, probably like 4 hours. It was that serious, and I had a cane, and And this was like, I was already North American champion. We had plans for the World Championships, and I didn't even tell my coach. I just, I said, he just said I needed to rest. But they told me that walking again would be difficult, that any sport would be difficult except for swimming. So kickboxing, my career was over at that point. That's what I was told. But same thing, I just plugged away at it. I went to, we have a seawall in Vancouver that's about 6 or 7 miles, and I used to have my mom drop me off there and pick me up at the end of the day. Hopefully I'd make it to the other side, and kind of that's how I started, that kind of baby steps, right? But no, I came out of that, and I did well after that. I did well after that injury for sure.
I just remember reading that, and I thought, well, just earlier in the book, she talked about how she took a tumble down the stairs and discovered that one leg was a little bit shorter than the other, and I thought, this is kind of strange. And I'm talking to my wife about this, and she says, well, maybe she's the reincarnation of Bruce Lee, and I did the math, and I said, no, I don't think so.
Maybe.
Fascinating stuff here. When you're out and you're talking with an audience, I'm sure that you find consistent questions, and I'm just going to take a guess here, that people ask in a way where they're wondering, what is the shortest way to get to what I want, and what is the way to get there with the least amount of, I guess, pain or suffering or growth? Do you hear questions that sort of sound like that?
I think it was questions, see, if you're looking for a short, easy way to go anywhere, then you're not going to go anywhere.
Right.
So I'm going to tell you. That's exactly where you're going to go, is nowhere, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's more after hearing my presentation, and when I talk about certain stories, they realize what it takes, to get to where you want to go in many circumstances, right? And not being afraid, again, of failure and stuff like that. But I've never had someone come up to me and go, well, what's my easy route? I think they're almost afraid to ask me that,
sure.
Right? Because, reality is there is no, right? In 99.9% cases, if you're expecting something to come easier or trying to take a shortcut, you're not going to end up anywhere, right? So, I think we just have to go into something completely prepared and really analyzing and deciding how badly you want it, and how, and also giving yourself a timeline. Like, what happens if, you have something planned that, you want it to happen in 6 months, right? But then 2 years go down the road, then what happens? With my cycling, Daniel, I thought I was going to be, all this crazy, awesome cyclist in 2 years. It took me 8 years. You know what I mean? I plugged it for 8 years, right?
But you stayed with it, too, though.
Yes, but it was, I finally got there, but that's what it'll take, right? And you have to be prepared for absolutely everything, and deciding if this is truly worth it for you. And also another thing too is when you get to that goal, what about the other opportunities that may be open for you? Like, what other doors will be open if you get there? Is really to plan, because a lot of things, like I'll call them having chapters in life, right? It kind of, you go on from one thing to the next, right? So you can see in mine, I have many, many chapters in my life, and I'm in a new chapter right now. And where will that lead you, and where do you want to see yourself again in 10 years? And also, I like writing things down, not on a computer, just writing it down on a piece of paper too. I think there's something with the pen to paper opposed to just typing it down, and seeing yourself, maybe put that envelope somewhere important, and then open it up again every couple of years and reading it, saying, how have I progressed since the last time? Personal. And I think that really helps you move forward in life and get those things that you want or have held off for so many years. It's just pre-planned. But again, Daniel, I'm very anti-easy way. Because there is no easy way.
Yeah, and the biggest reason I bring that up is because you've got $1 billion a year self-help industry that dangles that particular carrot, and I think to myself, I wished they would sometimes change that language for people to, how would you like to discover what's inside of you? And I remember there's one wonderful quote, and I can't remember who said this, but it was astounding to hear this, is when you can live to realize your fullest potential, you will simply astound yourself. And I thought, what a wonderful way to think about life. And like you, write that little goal statement down on a 3x5 card. I've got a butterfly box that I throw it into.
Right.
And there you go. And then maybe a year or 2 or 3 years later, I might open that box up and say, okay, now what's actually happened? And it's truly amazing once you write something down, and you can put it away. You don't have to review it every day. And then just begin living and realize it's going to pop up until you start pursuing it. And pretty soon you'll realize, man, I've actually overachieved this goal. Have you found that to be true for you?
I have, for sure. I mean, like I said, I'm a writer. I write everything down.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I plan it. But like I said, it's definitely having a plan. Like, where I want to see myself in 1 year, in 3 years, in 5 years, and I see, how are things going, right? And it really does help. It does when you see, and especially when you can cross those lines, right? Like overachieving was what you were saying, right? And it gives you more motivation to write down more things. It's kind of like on your A, B, or C list of things that you want to do. But I think that's one way. It's also kind of inspiring for yourself, too, to see what you're capable of doing, right? And maybe those little goals, right? Because I like that saying, if people aren't laughing at your goals, and maybe your goals aren't big enough, right? So for sure it's planning. And also, it's funny here, too, is when I do my presentation, it seems, too, as we get older, right, we stop setting goals. We do. We're, really enthusiastic and stuff when we're young, but then we come to an age where we just don't, right, for some reason, and we use age as an excuse, which is my biggest pet peeve, too. I'm 50, I can't do that. That's crap, you can't do it, right? You got 2 arms, 2 legs, whatever, you got a good head. You can still, there's everything you still can do, maybe with modification and stuff, right? But those goals should never stop. You can stop setting goals when you're 6 feet under. But when we're on this earth, let's get those goals going. Even if it is going to school at 80, who cares? Right? So that's the one thing, too, is, again, writing things down and never stop that forward progression.
And hence, Find Yourself with No Limits. Certainly a wonderful book. Is there a website the listeners can discover more?
You can go into my website for sure. It's www.leahgoldstein.com. Very simple.
And what's next for you, Leah?
Well, right now, actually, we have some producers that are playing around with the idea. But in all honesty, it's me just promoting my book. I'm on a speaking circuit right now, and just want to go hard for the next couple of years and get my book out there as much as possible.
Well, there you go. You certainly brought it to an audience that's hungry for stuff like this, especially when it comes to getting older and realizing, why have I put my dreams away? Well, what's wrong with pursuing them now? And now you're hearing it from a kickboxer that was told she couldn't do it anymore because of a back injury. Bruce Lee heard the same thing, and she says, oh, well, I think I'm going to do it anyway. Well, thank you for being on the radio program. It's certainly been a pleasure to have you here as our guest.
Right. Thanks again, Daniel, for having me.